Morgan Nick was born on September 12, 1988, in the quiet town of Ozark, Arkansas. Not long after her arrival, her parents welcomed two more children, a son, followed by another daughter just a year later. Morgan had a close bond with her younger siblings. They could spend hours playing together, and to them, Morgan was everything. A playmate, a role model, and a source of comfort. As she began learning to read, Morgan often practiced with picture books, taking special pride in reading bedtime stories to her little brother. She also had a deep love for animals. From a young age, she would tell her parents that one day she wanted to become a veterinarian. In elementary school, Morgan joined the Girl Scouts. She loved it, making crafts, going on nature outings, and enjoying the company of other girls her age. It was a bright, simple time in her life. But when Morgan was 6, her world shifted. Her parents decided to divorce. Even so, both remained active in their children's lives, and Morgan continued to spend meaningful time with her dad. In the early summer of 1995, a family friend invited Morgan's mother to a Little League baseball game in the nearby town of Alma. At first, she was hesitant. It was a Friday evening, and Alma was nearly 30 miles away. But eventually, she decided it might be a nice outing and brought Morgan along. It seemed like a harmless way to enjoy a summer night together. On the evening of June 9th, Morgan's mother left the younger children with their grandmother and made the 30-mile drive to Alma. The Little League stadium wasn't large, but that night it drew a sizable crowd. Around 300 people, mostly parents and children from the surrounding area. After arriving, she found her friends, and they settled in to watch the game. But for 6-year-old Morgan, the novelty quickly wore off. Before long, she spotted 2 other children she recognized and asked her mom if she could go play with them and catch fireflies near the stadium. At first, her mother hesitated. It was getting dark, and they were in an unfamiliar town. The thought of letting Morgan wander, even a short distance, made her uneasy. But her friends reassured her. Kids played near the stadium all the time, and there had never been any problems. Reluctantly, she gave Morgan permission. The little girl took off, running happily to join the others. They stayed within view, playing near a small hill not far from the bleachers. Her mother kept an eye on them, occasionally glancing over as the game continued. Roughly 15 minutes later, the game wrapped up. As the players made their way to the bleachers to greet their parents, Morgan's mother looked away, just for a moment. When she looked back, Morgan was gone. She scanned the field and spotted the 2 children Morgan had been playing with, now walking toward the bleachers, but Morgan wasn't with them. Her heart pounding, she approached the kids and asked where her daughter was. They explained that before returning to the stadium, they had stopped to empty the sand from their shoes. They'd gone to the parking lot, leaned against a nearby car, and shook out the sand. Morgan had been with them, standing behind the vehicle. When they finished and began walking back, Morgan was no longer there. They assumed she'd simply stayed behind to wait for her mom and didn't think much of it at the time. Morgan's mother rushed toward the parking lot, heading straight for her car, but there was no sign of her daughter. She looked inside, called out. Nothing. Panic began to set in. She went back to the kids, hoping they might remember something, anything, that could explain Morgan's disappearance. That's when they mentioned the man. While they were playing, they'd noticed a man standing near a red pickup truck in the parking lot. He seemed to be watching the stadium, occasionally glancing in their direction. At one point, he even walked over and said something to them, but they couldn't remember what. All they could say was that he had a country accent. Fearing the worst, Morgan's mother didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone and called the police. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. Just 6 minutes after the 911 call, police officers arrived at the stadium. Their first priority was to speak with the children who had been with Morgan moments before she vanished. As they gently questioned the kids, the officers began to piece together a clearer picture of the man seen near the parking lot. According to the children, the man was white, likely between 23 and 30 years old, around 6 feet tall, with an average build. He had dark hair, a mustache, and a beard. But what stood out even more was his vehicle. They described it in striking detail. An older model red pickup truck with Arkansas plates and a white camper shell mounted on the back. That camper shell immediately raised red flags. Not only was it large enough to hide a grown adult, let alone a child, but the kids noted that it didn't seem to fit the truck properly. It looked oddly short, like it had been made for a different model. To investigators, that detail suggested something more deliberate and possibly sinister. The children also recalled that the man was shirtless, wearing only a pair of jeans. Officers began a rapid search of the parking lot, scanning for any sign of a red truck matching the description, but it was gone. With no vehicle to follow, they turned their attention to the rest of the crowd. They moved through the remaining spectators, asking if anyone had noticed the man or seen anything out of the ordinary. But with a baseball game as the main focus, none of the nearly 300 attendees had noticed anything unusual. No one remembered seeing the red pickup. No one had seen Morgan walk off. The officers expanded their search, combing the area around the stadium, then branching out to nearby streets. Still, there was no sign of Morgan or the man she had last been seen near. Back at the stadium, her mother was devastated. She couldn't bring herself to go home. That night, she stayed at the local fire station, unwilling to leave without answers. By the next morning, news of Morgan's disappearance had spread quickly. Dozens of volunteers came forward, eager to help. The FBI and Arkansas State Police joined the investigation, deploying helicopters for aerial searches. Investigators also worked with Morgan's friends to create a composite sketch of the man they believed might have taken her. In the days following Morgan's disappearance, investigators moved quickly to get the word out. The composite sketch of the unidentified man, along with photos of Morgan, was circulated throughout Alma and neighboring towns in the hope that someone might recognize him or come forward with new information. At first, authorities didn't rule out the possibility that Morgan had simply wandered off and gotten lost. But as the hours passed with no trace of her, that theory grew less likely. By the 24-hour mark, it became clear. If she had gotten lost, someone would have found her by now. That evening, police began receiving troubling calls from other parents, stories that added a new layer of urgency to the case. One woman told officers that just hours before the baseball game, a man had attempted to lure her 4-year-old daughter into a red pickup truck near a local laundromat in Alma. The mother had stepped inside briefly, leaving her daughter just outside the building. When she returned, she spotted a man near the child, who quickly drove off in a red truck. Her description of the man matched the sketch almost exactly. Then, the day after Morgan vanished, another report came in. This time from Fort Smith, a nearby town. A witness described seeing a man trying to lure a 9-year-old girl into a public restroom. Thankfully, the girl got away unharmed. The suspect? He looked just like the man in the composite sketch. These reports painted a disturbing picture. Investigators began to consider that Morgan's abduction might not have been an isolated act, but part of a pattern. The suspect may have attempted similar crimes before. He might even have succeeded. Police doubled down on efforts to locate the red pickup truck described by the children and other witnesses. At the same time, they began running background checks on known sex offenders in surrounding towns and counties. Over the following weeks, hundreds of tips poured in. People called in possible sightings, names of suspicious individuals, and theories about the truck. Investigators followed up on each one, but time and again, the leads led nowhere. Either they couldn't establish a connection, or they were able to rule the person out entirely. Meanwhile, search teams combed the area around the stadium again and again, hoping for some kind of breakthrough. Investigators collected various discarded items, cigarette butts, drink bottles, scraps of material, anything that might hold a clue. All of it was sent off for DNA analysis, but none of it led to Morgan, and none of it definitively connected to the man in the sketch. As the search for Morgan intensified, one detail remained central to the investigation: the red pickup truck. Over the span of 2 weeks, police received nearly 250 calls from people across Arkansas and neighboring states, each reporting sightings of vehicles matching the description. But the lead quickly became a logistical nightmare. Red pickups were common across the region. Thousands of people owned similar models. Investigators worked tirelessly, following up on each tip and checking out truck owners one by one. Yet none of them had any verifiable link to Morgan's disappearance. Then, 2 weeks in, investigators received a call that reignited hope. A man in the town of Stuttgart, roughly a 3-hour drive from Alma, reported a disturbing incident. He told police he had been on his property when he caught a stranger trying to break into his car. The intruder ran when confronted, but not alone. The homeowner claimed the man was holding a little girl by the hand as he fled. Police showed him the composite sketch of the suspect in Morgan's case. The man said it looked like the person he'd seen. Even more compelling, he said the girl resembled Morgan. The response was immediate. Investigators launched a large-scale operation in Stuttgart, sealing off an area of about 10 square miles. Officers from multiple agencies were dispatched, joined by Morgan's parents, who raced to the town, hoping this was the break they'd been waiting for. Hundreds of volunteers joined the effort. Search teams canvassed streets, fields, and wooded areas. Helicopters scanned from above, and dogs were brought in to track scent trails using Morgan's clothing. The search lasted 16 hours, but in the end, there was nothing. No sign of the man, no trace of Morgan. As the dust settled, investigators began to question the witness's story. Something didn't add up. They administered 2 polygraph tests, both of which indicated deception. Under pressure, the man eventually confessed. He had fabricated most of the account. While he had in fact seen someone attempting to break into his car, he admitted he hadn't gotten a good look at the person, and there had never been a little girl. He was arrested for providing false information, a move that had cost law enforcement critical time and resources, not to mention raising the hopes of a grieving family. It's unclear what legal consequences he ultimately faced, but charges of this kind often carry serious penalties, including heavy fines or jail time. With the Stuttgart lead proven false, investigators found themselves back at square one. But giving up wasn't an option. To renew their efforts, they brought in 17 additional officers from across Arkansas, and the entire team began the painstaking task of resorting through every tip that continued to pour in. By that point, Over 1,500 leads had been logged, but not one had brought them any closer to finding Morgan. Her parents refused to give up, though the months dragged on with no answers. As time passed, the sharp hope they had clung to began to dull under the weight of uncertainty. Roughly a year after Morgan disappeared, her mother took a step that would help shape the future for others. She founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to locating missing children. While her own search for Morgan remained front and center, she recognized that there were many other families living the same nightmare. With no new clues to pursue in her daughter's case, she began devoting her energy to helping others, raising awareness about how quickly and quietly a child could vanish. Meanwhile, the investigation remained active. Over the next several years, police continued chasing down tips and questioning potential suspects. Yet again and again, the trail went cold. In 2001, 6 years after Morgan's disappearance, the FBI released an age-progressed image of what she might look like as a preteen. That same year, several national television programs aired segments on Morgan's case, bringing renewed public attention. More tips followed, but most ended in frustration. One call, however, stood out. A tipster claimed that Morgan's body had been buried on private property in Boonville, a small town about an hour from Alma. What made this lead different was the level of detail. The caller shared specific information about the case that had never been released publicly. Investigators took it seriously. In early 2002, police obtained a search warrant for the Boonville property. Search dogs were brought in, and officers carefully dug through the land, scanning every inch for evidence. But once again, the search turned up nothing. No sign of Morgan, no answers. For nearly a decade, the investigation into Morgan Nick's disappearance remained cold. Then, in 2010, police received a new tip, this time pointing to a location in another state where Morgan's suspected abductor might have kept her. Investigators followed up and conducted a thorough search, but once again, they found no evidence Morgan had ever been there. In a twist, authorities returned in 2017 to the same Boonville property they had searched back in 2002, but for an entirely different reason. A former resident of the home had since been convicted of crimes against minors and was being investigated in a separate, similar case. Hoping for a break, police searched the property again. But just like before, the search turned up no trace of Morgan and no new leads. Then, in 2019, Morgan's story resurfaced in the public eye with the release of a new documentary about the case. For the first time in over 2 decades, police released a photograph of the red pickup truck, believed to be linked to the abduction. The image had been captured by someone at the ballgame on the night Morgan vanished, but the photo's poor quality and bad angle made it nearly useless for identifying specific features. Still, authorities hoped it might jog someone's memory. They appealed to the public, asking anyone who might recognize the vehicle or know who owned it to come forward. Several new tips came in, but none brought investigators any closer to solving the case. Then, in 2021, after years of dead ends, police made a long-awaited announcement. They had identified a primary suspect in Morgan Nick's abduction. His name was Billy Lynx. Lynx had first drawn police attention in the early days of the investigation. He had a known criminal history involving minors and, notably, drove a red pickup truck similar to the one seen at the stadium. Back in 1995, police had interviewed Lynx, searched his vehicle, and looked for any connection to Morgan's disappearance. But nothing substantial emerged. Investigators at the time felt he was being truthful, and dismissed him, in part, because he was significantly older than the suspect described by Morgan's young friends. According to their accounts, the man near the red truck appeared to be in his 20s. Links was well over 30. With little to tie him to the crime, the case once again drifted into uncertainty, until new evidence years later would bring his name back to the forefront. Nearly 30 years after Morgan Nick vanished, investigators took another hard look at Billy Links. This time, with advances in forensic technology, they hoped modern DNA analysis might reveal something that earlier efforts had missed, particularly any trace of Morgan inside his vehicle. But they were facing serious obstacles. For one, Billy Links had died in prison back in 2000, just 5 years after Morgan disappeared. At the time of his death, he was serving time for a different attempted abduction, one that occurred only 2 months after Morgan went missing. In that case, he had tried to lure a young girl into his car outside a store, but her mother intervened and called the police. Links was arrested shortly afterward. He had been 70 years old at the time and died of natural causes behind bars. Another complication was the red pickup truck. Police had no idea what had happened to it in the decades since his arrest, or whether it even still existed. Determined, investigators began tracking the truck's chain of ownership. After months of digging through records, they found it. Against all odds, the vehicle was still in use, and the current owner agreed to let police conduct a forensic examination. At first, detectives tempered their expectations. After all, nearly 30 years had passed. Any DNA evidence could have long since degraded or been cleaned away. But then, forensic experts discovered something unexpected. A few hairs embedded in the truck bed. The color and characteristics were consistent with Morgan's hair. The hairs were sent to a specialized DNA lab in Texas, equipped with cutting-edge technology capable of analyzing even degraded genetic material. The wait was long, 8 months, but the results were worth it. Scientists successfully extracted DNA from one of the hairs. When they compared it to a sample from Morgan's mother, the result was clear. A close familial match, indicating the hair came from someone directly related to her, most likely a child or sibling. Morgan's mother confirmed she had never met Billy Links. She'd never seen his truck, and no other member of Morgan's immediate family had any reason to be in that vehicle. To detectives, that could only mean one thing: Morgan Nick had been in that truck. On October 1st, 2024, nearly 3 decades after Morgan Nick vanished from that Little League field in Alma, police held a long-awaited press conference. They formally named Billy Links as the man responsible for her abduction, and stated publicly that they had no doubt about his involvement. Investigators now believe that Morgan likely died within days of being taken. Though they've reached a conclusion about who committed the crime, the question of where her remains are remains unanswered. With no confession and the suspect long deceased, finding her final resting place may be an impossible task. Still, detectives aren't giving up. The case may be officially considered solved, but the search continues. Authorities say they will keep looking for Morgan's remains and follow any new leads that might emerge. They're also expanding their investigation into Billy Links himself. Given his attempted abductions shortly after Morgan disappeared, and the fact that he was 70 years old at the time, investigators suspect there could be many more crimes in his past. His age suggests that Morgan's case may not have been his first. Links had also served in the military during World War II, a detail that detectives believe may have given him skills he later used to conceal his crimes. Morgan Nick's disappearance became one of the most widely known child abduction cases in Arkansas history. As a lasting tribute, The state renamed its version of the Amber Alert system Morgan Alert, honoring the little girl whose case helped reshape how missing children are searched for. As for her mother, she continues the work she began decades ago, helping other families through the nonprofit she founded in Morgan's name. For her, the mission has been both purpose and survival, and while she accepts what the evidence now shows, she still holds on to a quiet, enduring hope that maybe, just maybe, Morgan is still out there somewhere. Share your thoughts on this story in the comment section. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.